this people part of safety is a part that's often missed when we look at safety just from the traditional safety management system perspective. When we recognize that it's not systems that do safety, it's people acting in systems that is safety.
Susan Sawatzky, thank you so much for joining us today on the Safety Spotlight podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I appreciate it.
Yeah, we're happy to have you here today. So your work is extensive in the safety space. You've worked with a lot of different corporations during your career, including NASA, which I'm super excited to get into. I think a good place for us to start would just be having you run us through your background and how you got to where you are today.
Sure, yeah. Let's see. I actually started out in education. I taught junior high and high school math and sciences. And then when I switched careers, I ended up in safety. And I started in traditional safety, inspections and auditing and whatnot. But as part of my career, I ended up managing the fatigue portfolio for the Canadian oil and gas industry. And for me, that was just such a switch in the way that I looked at safety and the way that I felt safety overall could be managed. And it allowed me to see the importance of these human risk factors and focusing in on the people that do the work and really understanding the human capital aspect of safety. And so, from there, I expanded my education. I went back and got a master's in industrial psychology with a minor in health psychology. And then as part of that academic profile, I also teach for 3 universities. So I teach for the University of Alberta, the University of Calgary, and the University of New Brunswick. And I teach primarily health and safety professionals and HR professionals how to manage these human risk factors. So courses like psychological health and safety in the workplace, fatigue risk management, business and leadership, and more. And then sort of the other side of that, once I really began to understand more and more how important these human risk factors were. I began a consulting company and focused primarily in those areas within our consulting. So we do things like fatigue risk management in the workplace, but we also do stress management and mental health and wellness, and then just sort of overall organizational culture and how that influences people and safety. So, yeah. Yeah,
I love it. It sounds like you've been busy. So
It's been busy, but it is kind of a bit of a passion project as well. Like I really think that this people part of safety is a part that's often missed when we look at safety just from the traditional safety management system perspective. And when we recognize that it's not systems that do safety, it's people acting in systems that is safety. And once you sort of recognize that human component and focus in on the people doing it, I think it's a real game changer.
So almost going beyond just the checklist and seeing what lies underneath. So let's delve into it a little bit more. Fatigue. Mm-hmm. I think that word gets thrown around a lot.
So much, yeah.
What does that really mean at the end of the day?
Yeah, at the end of the day, fatigue is really about impairment. And it's about worker impairment. And many people have probably heard of the really famous study that's been done many, many times that compared people who've been awake for long periods of time to alcohol impairment. And it's been shown very clearly that someone who's awake roughly 21 hours is impaired at the same level as somebody with a blood alcohol level of 0.08. So that's the legal limit. Right? And we would never allow someone legally impaired to show up in our workplace and say, just be careful out there. Like, we just wouldn't do it. We have too much awareness. But if somebody shows up and they've been working shift works or for whatever reason, they're just exhausted, we don't have that same recognition on how impaired that person is and how much that impacts safety in the workplace.
Wow, 0.08. So that's equivalent to the legal drinking limit. And you make such a good point that we wouldn't want anyone showing up to site at that level. So why would we make the excuse? So in what industries are you really seeing this being a big challenge? Because I think in some it's probably a little bit more than others.
Absolutely.
So where are you seeing those issues kind of come up?
Yeah, it's high risk industries, right? So there is a risk of people being tired in any job that you do, but it can be managed and it more has small impacts or more impacts people's health and wellness. But where it becomes a safety issue is in the high risk industries where you've got shift work, where you have people working, 12 or more hours, where you have night shifts. That's where your risk really goes high. And so any industries where you've got those kinds of shifts happening, and that can be anywhere from healthcare to manufacturing to oil and gas, petrochemical, there's so many industries that have shift work involved, and that just increases the risk of fatigue becoming an issue.
And how do you talk to the leaders? I think that that's a big part of this. Is at the end of the day, there's almost this, from what I've heard, is there's the safety managers, and they kind of end up butting heads with the leaders in other departments that are driving for things like productivity and making sure that the job's getting done quick, right, when there's a lot of pressure. How do you go about communicating the importance of managing fatigue properly, especially maybe under those tighter deadlines?
I think a couple of things. One, recognizing fatigue management is not having everybody work 9 to 5. Like, it's really balancing those operational needs, and those operational needs mean often that you need those longer hours, around the clock coverage, or whatever is required. But balancing those operational needs with what we know about human physiology, and then empowering everyone from the leadership to the supervisors to the workers to be able to manage those risks. We train people on so many risks in the workplace, but I can't tell you the number of organizations I've gone into where they've had shift work running for decades, and they're like, oh, we haven't had fatigue management training, or oh, we did, but it was like ages ago. And it's like, we would train a worker on a chemical they have to handle, and yet fatigue is part of the day-to-day risks that they're encountering, and we don't empower people to know what to do about it. So sort of circling back from the leadership perspective, from a leadership perspective, recognizing that there's so many ways you can manage fatigue. You can operationalize, you can look at your operational hours and optimize those. But once you've optimized the hours of work, then you want to look at empowering your supervisors to be able to identify signs of fatigue and then know what to do about it. So what are the countermeasures that your supervisor is going to bring into play? Are they going to provide extra supervision? Are they going to reassign tasks? Are they going to, send someone off shift for a short period of time to catch up on their sleep? There's lots of things you can empower a supervisor with. And then empowering the worker, right? Like, the worker is the one who's dealing with fatigue, and everybody has their one or two go-to techniques, right? Oh, I drink coffee, or I'll take a break, or whatever.
Play loud music, whatever it might be.
Exactly, yeah. But people don't know their own physiology. They don't know about sleep cycles. They don't always know about circadian rhythms. They don't know how to work with those to be able to manage their fatigue. And they don't know the full volume of countermeasures, the toolbox of countermeasures that they can use to manage fatigue. And what's more, you can even give people some data to be able to know when those countermeasures are being effective and when they're not being effective. So there's so many things that companies can do to manage fatigue that are reasonable and cost effective, even from when you time certain high risk tasks, right? Like, if your supervisor understands circadian rhythms, then they know that scheduling a high risk task at 1 p.m. is a terrible idea. And they know, if I have to schedule it at 1 p.m, then I should have some other safety measures in place, because that's a circadian low for people. But if they don't have that information, then they're not taking those precautions, and you're increasing your risk.
Right. And let's dive into circadian rhythm a little bit. Yeah. I'm fascinated by this topic, but not everyone, is familiar with what that actually means. So when we talk about circadian rhythms and sleep patterns, what are we actually really talking about here?
So they're two different things. Your circadian rhythms are your 24-hour body rhythms. And literally almost every system in your body runs on a 24-hour cycle. And so if you understand circadian rhythms, and you understand a normal circadian rhythm and the ebbs and flows of that, you can recognize when people are more alert and when people are less alert throughout a typical day. And then when you know those rhythms, you can change tasks, right? Put your tasks in different places in alignment with them. But you can also manage your sleep differently. So there's even apps that, if you are utilizing your sleep cycles and your circadians, you can know when to go to bed and when to wake up, right? Like, there's so many things you can do to work with that. And then kind of aligned with that is the idea of sleep cycles, which sleep cycles were discovered like way back in the 1960s. And scientists put electroencephalographs on people's brains and they measured the brain waves that we naturally give off. And from that, they figured out what it is we do when we sleep. And they discovered that we go through 4 very distinct stages of sleep. So our stage 1, 2 are the light stages of sleep. If you get woken up in the middle of a stage 1, 2 sleep, you're going to wake up right away. You're going to be alert. You're going to be ready to go, right? Stage 3 is a really deep stage of sleep. And the new science, relatively recent science, is that they now understand that's when our cerebral spinal fluid is going into our brain and clearing the toxins from our brain cells. It's the reason we and almost every other living thing on earth need sleep. And it's because it's what clears out our brains, right? And so if you get woken up in the middle of that stage 3 sleep, it's funny, we kind of intuitively know. We're like, oh, I've got like this foggy brain. Well, you actually literally do, right? But that's the sleep inertia stage. That if you get woken up in the middle of that stage 3 sleep, you're going to have a hard time waking up. You're going to have that awful achy feeling, the brain fog, all of that. And then stage 4, that's your REM, your rapid eye movement, your dream sleep. And that's one that's important for how we process information and store long-term memories. But we go through those 4 stages of sleep multiple times in the night, and we go through them in about a 90-minute cycle. So you can use that information to, for example, figure out how long you should nap, right? So people will say to me, even at a conference or whatever, they're like, oh, I'm going to go lay down. I'm going to go have an hour-long nap. And it's like, no, that's the worst timing you could have for a nap. That's going to put you right in a stage 3 sleep. And you're going to wake up and you're going to feel achy and awful and have a hard time waking up, right? But if you know these sleep cycles, you can go, oh no, I'm going to have a 20-minute nap. And that 20-minute nap is going to put me in a stage 1, 2 sleep. It's going to have me wake up and be mentally alert and restored, and I'll be good to go.
So there's a real difference in how you're actually approaching it and almost building a sort of intuitive sense for yourself. How do you, that's not something that I think most people can kind of tell when they wake up feeling good or not. Most of us brush it to the side. How do you sort of build up that, I don't want to call it muscle memory, but that intuition of when you're feeling tired, when you're feeling awake, and that self-awareness? Where do people kind of start on that journey, I guess?
Yeah, so many of us intuitively recognize when we're feeling alert, when we're not. It's interesting though, because people can become a bit desensitized to it, right? So you'll talk to these workers who've worked shift work for years and years, and they're like, no, 5 hours, that's all I need. 5 hours sleep, I'm good. And the research shows 100% that people can get used to having less sleep, but their level of impairment continues to grow, right? It's not like we can get used to less sleep to the point where it doesn't impair our abilities. We can just get used to it where we're used to always being at that lower level and it becomes the norm, right? So we can become a little bit immune to it. I find what often happens in industries where there is high levels of fatigue risk, it becomes normalized. It becomes this system of being tired is just the way it is. A little bit of that suck it up, buttercup, right?
Almost a badge of honor.
Badge of honor.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Sometimes we call it the Superman syndrome, right? I don't need sleep. I'm, superhuman, right? But when you create that awareness of what less sleep does to people, how it does impair their abilities, and when employers realize how relatively easy it can be to fully manage that risk, then you can make a difference in terms of overall safety, in terms of those minor incidents that often get overlooked. I'll work with companies and they'll say, we don't have any major fatigue incidents. And then you go through their data and you start to look at the worker error incidents. And you come at it with a lens of knowing that 13% of all workplace injuries are fatigue related. And you know that,
wow.
A tired worker is 3 times more likely to be involved in a workplace incident versus a well-rested worker. And a worker's 4 times, we'll throw some stats out here, a worker's 4 times more likely to be impaired by fatigue than drugs or alcohol, right? Because fatigue's just more common. So many of these incidents that get written off as worker error have fatigue as a contributing factor, but it's not recognized. It's not recognized in the incident investigation process or by those in the organization. So when they don't know what's causing it, they're not working proactively to manage the risk on the front end.
There's almost, I guess, to a certain extent, like we said, in some industries, can be a badge of honor. So there might be unwillingness to sort of go in that direction, because if they cut hours, then they'll think that productivity kind of drops. Where have you seen, I think that you would probably be one of the best people to ask this, those stories where this has really gone sideways? Where
I got a good one, actually. I've got a good one that really talks about how to shift that culture.
Right.
Because I can't tell you the number of organizations I've gone into where fatigue is just the way it is. And it's an accepted part of the way that work is done. And, we're not even looking at optimizing hours, right? And ideally, you do want to optimize your hours. But often, as I said, operational demands means you can't work a 9 to 5, right?
Having worked with so many different organizations, you're probably one of the best people to ask this. What are some of those examples of workplaces where they weren't implementing any fatigue management and there were some real issues that were coming up?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of my favorite is a mining company that I was working with, and they were way up in the north. So, you're flying in and out of this mining company site, and it was really great. And I had 2 phenomenal learnings from working with that company. I think the first was that fatigue could actually be managed even without the formal systems. Because part of the work I did with them is I did fatigue risk assessment in each of their different areas of the mine. So they had a production, they had underground mining, and they had pit mining. And so as I'm assessing all the risk factors and then looking through their incident data and sort of figuring out where incidents are occurring, I was working with the open pit. And open pit mining has every risk factor imaginable when it comes to fatigue. Like these guys are top of the line risk, right? And yet, I looked through all of their incident data and everything they had almost no incidents relating to fatigue. So I'm a little stumped. I'm like, what's going on? And then I realized, just from talking to people, right, you start those informal conversations and finding out what's really going on. Their manager in that part of the mine had a near miss a couple of years before, where he was driving home and he almost ran off the road falling asleep, right? He gave all kinds of information to people on a regular basis, toolbox talks, and he had all kinds of toolbox talk information on fatigue, even though, we have those formal ones, but he just, looked it up, gave out all that information. And they had an unwritten rule that at any time, if you're driving and you're feeling tired, you just signal in, I'm taking my break, and you could pull off to the side and have that 15, 20-minute nap, restore yourself, and then get back on. And so even though it wasn't part of formal policy, they were managing it. They were bringing in all of those processes and systems to fully manage it. They had high risk. They had almost no incidents. It was really impressive.
Yeah, and open pit mining is one of the big ones.
It's a big one, yeah. And I think the other one this is my favorite. Working with the underground miners, and they were worried we were going to cut their hours. And these were contract miners, so they would fly in, work their contract hours, fly out. Nobody wanted me to touch the hours, right? We're making a lot of money. We do not want you. And I was told day one, they were not shy. They're like, lady, you try and change our hours, we're all going to walk off like that, right? Don't mess with the hours. I'm like, hey, I'm just here to share information, right? And I start doing the training. And I'm empowering people. I'm such a huge believer in how information can empower people, and especially when it's done right, when it's not just talking at people, when you're engaging people and you're bringing them in and you're helping them see how this applies to what they're doing. It's not just facts and information. It's what does this really mean for you and how do you use this? So we did a lot of these workshops and discussions and whatnot. And As luck would have it, they had a major incident, and it was serious. No one was killed, but boy, oh boy, they had a fire at the entrance to the underground. They had workers underneath, only kind of through this superhero effort where one of the workers jumped in the vehicle that was on fire and drove it out of the entrance. That's the only reason people didn't die. Like it was really scary. And it was 100% fatigue related. And they could all see it. They all had the information. They all saw how the worker made the mistake after he'd been working the long shift and what he did. And it was a game changer, right? And all of a sudden, attitudes changed and focus changed. And I mean, hopefully it doesn't take a major incident for organizations to see it, but, giving people that information and awareness helps them to recognize when it's having an issue on safety. And then the proactive pieces can really fall into place.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, to your point, hopefully there are no incidents, but it's kind of these proactive conversations that I think get the ball rolling in the right direction. And, something else that I picked out there was these little informal tools and informal practices that we can kind of integrate, such as the 15, 20-minute nap. Are there any others that kind of come to mind when you think of, good tools? Because I think there's a lot of processes and things that we can do here. It's just they aren't talked about or they aren't thought about. So I'd love to hear what you've kind of uncovered.
Yeah, so I'll just share a couple. There's so many, but right down to the food you eat. So when you have a snack, if you understand how food influences your glycemic index, which is your blood sugar levels, you can choose the right kinds of foods to even out your blood sugar levels, which evens out some of the impacts of fatigue. Because when you don't get enough sleep, your blood sugar is really irregular because your body's not processing it properly. Eating the right foods can just help influence some of the impacts of fatigue. So just little things that people don't know, right? It's fascinating.
There's so much there. If eating a high sugar diet early in the morning, well, you're going to have some sort of crash later in the day.
Yeah.
Something else that I know that you've done a lot of work on is around psychological safety and that aspect. And it is something that's talked about quite often. When it comes to psychological safety, I think we'll start out. What does that really mean, psychological safety?
Yeah. So there's a little bit of confusion in terms that sometimes happens. So there's psychological safety and there's psychological health and safety. And they sound really similar, but they're very different terms. So psychological health and safety is a big umbrella term of all of the things within a company that can be done to better manage people and their overall mental health and wellness. So everything from leadership to support to growth and development of the individual, like it's a big umbrella term. And if you look at like the CSA standard, the Canadian standard that relates to it, you can say there's 13 different psychosocial factors, but there's lots of ways to sort of splice and dice it. And it's just those things that influence the organizational culture and how it impacts people. Psychological safety is really about having people feel empowered to speak up in the workplace. So we have some of that enshrined in legislative law, but at the end of the day, whether people speak up or don't speak up comes down to how safe they feel in that workplace. Are you going to, be impugned by your supervisor? Are you going to be, teased by the other workers for speaking up? Is it a safe environment for you to speak up and share your concerns? And one of the things we do is we often kind of come in with some of the precursor pieces for that psychological safety, where we kind of start at the base. We start at square one with this respectful workplace. And respectful workplace isn't just about, how to not have harassment and bullying and all of that. Obviously, that's the extreme end of the it's not working. But it's, what are microaggressions, things like eye rolling and facial expressions, and how do those influence people in the workplace? And how do you teach people with certain communication styles like passive aggressive? How do you teach them how to communicate in their workplace in a way that allows them to get what they need without, harming the workplace culture overall? And how do you empower your supervisors to be able to manage conflict in a way that grows your workplace culture instead of diminishes it. And so we do have some sort of respectful workplace workshops that teach people some of those skills to help them communicate better and interact better in their workplace to enhance that overall culture, which enhances psychological safety as well.
Right. So it's really a piece that involves everyone. There's not just one, like a top-down thing. You have to build it kind of from the ground up in a way is kind of what I'm getting.
Special thanks to our sponsor, BIS Safety Software, one of the leading safety and compliance software applications on the market today. We wanted to shout out the team for their new lone worker technology, designed to provide enhanced protection and peace of mind for workers while they are working alone. It includes features like check-in schedules, automated notifications, and you can designate supervisors to receive alerts. This lone worker technology helps round out the full scope of their safety management software. Lone worker is just the tip of the iceberg. See everything they have to offer at bissafety.ca.
So when it comes to technological advances in the space of fatigue management, obviously we've seen so much, recently with AI and all the different advancements out there. What are some of those, kind of top of the cutting edge of the space that you're seeing right now that really excite you?
Yeah, there's one I'm working with right now. It's an AI company out of Silicon Valley. And what they have created empirically, like their data's down pat, in 6 seconds of voice recording, they can quantitatively identify if someone is impaired in any way. And what's more, their system can break it down if you choose to set it up that way. They can break it down to note if that impairment is because of fatigue, alcohol, drugs. They can break it down. Now, how we've been working with it is we've been bringing it into organizations strictly looking at fatigue. It just gets a little muckier, messier, bringing it in for some of those other aspects when you're doing it in this proactive way. But if you bring it into a company that has these high risks in relation to fatigue, in 6 seconds, the fatigue can be identified, and it'll be identified at different levels. So at the lower levels, it's used as a feedback mechanism for workers. So they get the feedback, oh, I'm a little bit tired. Here's all the countermeasures, right? They've got the education, they've got the tools in the toolbox. Here's all the countermeasures. Okay, I'm going to do this one. I'm going to take a short break. I'm going to have coffee. I'm going to go for a walk. Or I'm going to, right, whatever your countermeasure is. Then they can go back in and quantitatively see how that impacted their fatigue levels.
Oh, so like a difference or a change in...
Absolutely.
Wow.
So that's a tool for them to manage it on their end. If it does get to the extreme levels, if we're talking, alcohol impairment levels of fatigue where it's dangerous and you should not be doing safety sensitive work at that level, then, and the organization can set where those levels are, then that triggers to a supervisor. So both the worker and the supervisor are aware. And now the supervisor can start stepping in and saying, okay, well, we need to reassign some tasks, right? You can't be doing this safety sensitive work because you're extremely tired, or you need to go take a nap for 20 minutes or 90 minutes, depending on their level of fatigue, before you can start shift. And then we're going to test you before you start, and then we'll go from there.
Wow.
So it's amazing. It's like technology has brought in these quantitative tools where we don't have to guess anymore. We don't have to say, I think you're tired, right? I see the signs and symptoms, but you're telling me, no, you're good, because you're worried you're going to get in trouble for it because we don't have the full culture to deal with it, right?
Yes.
Now we have quantitative measures, and those quantitative measures can be used as teaching tools, as feedback mechanisms, and as true safety guardrails.
Are they actually implementing this yet? Is this?
Yeah, so we've been running some pilots, and it's been amazing. We've looked at pilots in turnaround environments, shutdown turnarounds. Those are really high-risk environments in relation to fatigue, right? They're running 24 hours, sometimes 7 days a week. High-risk work because, it's sometimes millions of dollars a day when the plants are shut down. And so it's a high-stress, high-risk environment. And we've been looking at some pilots with that, as well as pilots in other high risk environments, petrochemical and
Wow.
whatnot. Yeah.
So are they able to, you said they can reliably piece out the data here. Is it like, how accurate really is this?
In scientific studies, accurate, accurate, accurate. I've only worked with them thus far in the fatigue management piece. So we've only piloted the fatigue management component. The other systems are shut off. So there is that capability of the technology, but the system is set up just strictly to look at fatigue, because that's one that's easy to kind of bring in and work with.
Yeah, I'd imagine when I just think of like somebody catching impairment or some sort of, that's where it gets like, you better be sure that this is working to a high standard. But it's incredible how fast these things are sort of, I guess, progressing. And this
in a camp environment,
oh yeah,
it would work great because it's a non-intrusive way of measuring impairment. And also, the drug test will tell you that someone did marijuana within the past 2 weeks. The employer doesn't really care, right? If they did it over the weekend, who cares? What I need to know is, are they impaired right now? And so it's a very non-intrusive way to test for that. And so in a camp environment, the application would be, fantastic. Yeah.
So you've done a lot of work with many different organizations, one of them being NASA, which I think is always fascinating to kind of talk about. What were some of the, moving from oil and gas and mining and some of those traditional industries to aerospace, what were some of the challenges that you kind of saw that were maybe unique to that industry?
Yeah. I think what I found working with NASA, so I got to go to 3 of their different agencies, and then I also got to work with their health and safety professionals across all of the agencies. And it was really great. So, and everyone from engineers to astronauts, like it's been a really amazing experience. Like it really has added to my career overall. I enjoyed it. I think what I found is that sometimes in oil and gas and mining, it's more a work directive approach that's causing the fatigue and issues, right? It's that we have to get this task done in this amount of time, and sometimes supervisors not necessarily recognizing and understanding issues related to fatigue, workers not knowing how to manage. But when you get into NASA and also even some of the senior engineers in things like pharmaceutical manufacturing or petrochemical, it's more of the self-induced, that pursuit of perfection that leads to the higher levels of fatigue. So we were doing one recently with a pharmaceutical manufacturer, and I was seeing remnants of the NASA culture, where it was that culture of perfectionism, that high standard of what I'm going to do to bring to the organization. No one's telling me I have to work these hours, but I want to succeed and I want to see this project done really well. And that's often what drives the fatigue. And so when it's people driving their own work, it's even harder to manage. And you really have to empower people to recognize, no, actually, you're going to be more productive. If you take that short break, like you will be more productive. And, you're more likely to make a critical error in the overall larger task if you push yourself to certain levels of fatigue, right? We know that fatigue impacts our mental abilities, our abilities to make decisions and problem solve and think clearly and concentrate. So if you're pushing your fatigue levels, you're more likely to have a critical error in your calculations, for example. So it's the same thing. It's fatigue impairment causing concerns, just in a very different way.
And you mentioned that specific to maybe the culture of NASA, but this is, in a lot of highly competitive industries, there is this sort of, innate, it kind of comes with the territory that you are wanting to, these people are obviously super competitive to get in there to begin with, right?
They're self-driven.
They're self-driven. Yeah, exactly. So,
but what I found interesting that was the same in both groups is that when you give people that information, whether it's that quantitative data that you can get from something like a Tenvos AI, or whether it's just overall the information to understand your physiology and how that's impacting your sleep cycles and the work that you do and your fatigue overall, people like that information. They like to have that knowledge to be able to manage their own levels. And that was consistent across all industries.
So what were some of those, I guess, key like data points that you were showing people that kind of like they were like, whoa, okay, this is interesting, or this is worth my time to kind of consider, especially when it's people that are self-driven, that are, it's gonna be hard to, crack that egg, right? So
Yeah, I mean, they're well educated, right? So
Yeah.
you've got lots of people with, doctors and doctorates and PhDs and, all of that. But even though sleep and fatigue is something that is so common for all of us, some of this knowledge just isn't common knowledge, right? Like people don't necessarily understand sleep cycles and how they impact us. And so some of those data points you could give people is recognize their own signs and symptoms, but also how to use that background science and knowledge to be able to self-manage yourself. And then a lot of the tools and tricks that you can use to have that wide repertoire of tools to use to manage your own fatigue.
Right. And when you're kind of opening that conversation with these people, where are you like starting, I guess? Do you go with, and maybe more specifically, do you start with the leaders or do you start with just the employees like day to day? Where are you kind of beginning this?
It depends on the company. It really does. And so sometimes we're brought in by senior leadership and they want to understand the economic and safety impacts that fatigue's having on their organization and what they can do about it. Sometimes we're brought in at the worker level. But where we find the most success is when everyone throughout the organization is given the education. So a senior leadership, you're talking about business impacts, you're talking about the systems that they need to enact organizationally, and you're giving them the employer-based information to manage it effectively. What is a fatigue risk management strategy? What does it involve? Supervisors, it's signs and symptoms, and then worker level, it's that knowledge to manage it overall.
Right. So there's really like a lot of different strategies that you can apply at each different level. I'm curious for the leaders that are listening and they want to start changing. Maybe they notice their culture is kind of lacking in this place. Is it like, how important is it for the leaders to really model this and kind of take the lead, right, in being the ones to really showcase that they value fatigue management?
Yeah, I think in any human risk factor, whether you're looking at stress, mental health and wellness, fatigue, leadership's being able to model it is a critical part. I think leadership also showing support for the systems that manage it, right? So recognizing that you need to give people that ability to have the balance overall.
Right. Yeah. No, that makes sense. When it comes to the other risk factors, because fatigue is not just the only one. You mentioned it was stress, and then what's the other one?
Yeah, there's lots of human risk factors
Okay.
overall. Some of the ones that we focus in on, and that's just sort of where our work has evolved. We work with companies in fatigue, and they're like, okay, great. Now we want to know more about stress, and now we want to know more about mental health and wellness. So those have been the two other big areas that we focused in on. When we come at the mental health and wellness piece, we come at it from what we call mental fitness. And mental fitness, it's just like physical fitness. It's all those habits and regular rituals that you want to engage in that are going to make you physically healthy. Only in this case, it's all the ones that can help you to be more mentally healthy. And there's so many habits that either the bad habits you want to get rid of or the good habits you want to engage in more often. And once you really focus in on those types of habits, you can improve your mental health and wellness quite a lot, right? You can, for example, I think a good one, I'll start with an example, how we talk to ourselves, right? What does that voice inside your head say when you make a big mistake? Is it like, you idiot, what were you thinking? That was so stupid, right? Or is it saying, ooh, okay, yeah, we messed up, but we got this. We can work to improve this. We can fix this. And even just little things in how you let your own voice speak to you can have such a huge influence on your overall mental health and your mental fitness.
So you mentioned, bring like habits and bringing that kind of into the conversation. How do we build effective habits when we're, thinking about changing because it's easy to say that and then you want to make this change, but oftentimes, you give it a few weeks and it's kind of, you've forgotten about it. So how do you stay consistent with it?
Yeah, and that's actually an integrated part of our training overall. We're huge believers in the idea that if you just give information to people, oh, great, that was interesting, one and done, it's forgotten. But if you give people information and then you leverage it based on their existing constructs and the way that they think about the world, and then you help them integrate it into their day-to-day practices, and then you give them tools so that that is consistent and reinforced time and time again, that's when you see changes in behavior. And so it's really structuring the information that it's not just stuff thrown at people, that it's done in a way that allows people to integrate it into their day-to-day habits, and that they can see how this influences the way I do work or the way I live my life, because it's often work and home that you're looking at, right? And so you give them the tools and the systems and the processes to say, okay, so we're going to take this and we're going to add it into our toolbox. What does that look like? How do you plan that into your daily practices? And starting with a few at a time, and then, okay, how do we build the next one in?
So, I find with a lot of this stuff, it's almost like getting the ball rolling is kind of the main, the hardest part. And then once you've got that first system in place, you can kind of keep it going. Another
James Clear also gives some amazing information on how to build a habit, how to get
Atomic Habits, right?
Yeah, Atomic Habits.
Yeah.
Like, you can't say it better than that.
Yeah,
So
the habit stacking, and there's all kinds of great stuff there.
Leverage some of his research into the way that we help people integrate this information into their habits.
Right. And when it comes to habits and bringing them into the organization and who you've worked with specifically, have you kind of seen those, I guess, like those turnaround stories where you went in, you saw, whoa, okay, there's nothing here, and then you were able to really kind of build that?
Yeah. I mean, it's not like one session will fully change it, but you see, like, so for example, one of the ones that we give in our mental fitness, we talk about popcorn positivity, right? And it's just a fun way of saying, okay, think of your workplace like a bowl of popcorn. It's not one person, it's not one thing, it's a bunch of individual things, right? And so if every day you go into work and you do one positive thing for someone, you bring them a cup of coffee, you sit and ask them how they're doing, or just, you say, oh, great job on this project. If every day you do one positive thing, it builds the entire bowl of popcorn positivity. And so we've thrown some of those out in some of our workshops and then come back afterwards and done a check-in, and people are like, yeah, like we're seeing the positivity, like we're seeing overall. And that's, just one small example of one small thing, but it can start to have an impact. And I think whenever a company takes the time to invest in their human capital, right? When you really invest in your people, which it kind of kills me how we're so good at maintaining our machines, right? We do the inspections, we do the regular maintenance, but we don't do that for our people always in the same way. And so when companies start to really tune into their people and bring them some of the skills and knowledge and training to be able to enhance those skills, that's when they start to see the change overall. And I think the other way we really see that happening in a company is through the leadership. We've put together, recently we've done a big leadership training, and we've rolled it out to several companies. And the leadership training really came about because we kept working with workplaces and we would empower workers, but then it would often get stopped at the supervisor level. Because supervisors in particular, sometimes middle managers, but often supervisors, get promoted because they're really good at the technical skills. We're good at making the widget. And so we get promoted up. But now my job isn't making the widget. My job is managing the people to make the widget. And yet supervisors aren't always given those people skills to know, what do I do when I have a conflict in the workplace? What do I do when someone's looking like they're getting burnt out? What do I do when I suspect maybe someone's dealing with a mental health issue? And it's not that they're not good people, and it's not that they don't want to help, right? They just don't have the skills. And so our people leader training was really all about giving supervisors, we run like a 7-week program. We teach them, how do you manage conflict? What do you do when this person's not getting along with this person? Or what do you do when this person's, being very conflict driven towards you? And how do you manage those things? And how do you build trust? And how do you enhance your leadership? And I think that's where we've really seen a big difference. And we've gone back to organizations and seen qualitatively, we didn't have quantitative on it, but we've seen a lot of qualitative places where people are telling us, oh, like it's made such a difference. And I've seen so much difference in the way so-and-so is managing people, or just overall, we're really seeing our culture enhanced because of these skills that people are enacting.
Out of all the things you brought up, conflict management, I think, to me, is the one that maybe is the easiest to talk about and the actually one of the most difficult to implement.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is when you're actually in a conflict or there's a disagreement, actually taking step-by-step approach to making sure that you're resolving it in a way that's effective and makes sense when you're not thinking in a process-oriented headspace is not easy. It's really not easy. How do you go about, and if you're okay to kind of delve into that a little bit, how do you go about when you're in that space, kind of, slowing down and really making sure that we're taking all the right steps here?
So in our training, we actually give people practice. So we have a live program where you are managing the conflict, and whatever you do is influencing the individuals in the conflict. So it's an AI driven, and so you're trying to manage Joe and Linda, whatever. And so you work with Joe and you say this, well, Joe will react based on how skilled you were in managing that conflict. And then, they'll react in real time as you're managing it. It's typing in and out, right? It's not, I don't make people role play, I promise. But this AI driven system is reacting in real time. And then when you're done the scenario, you say stop, and it'll give you all the feedback on what you did well and what you didn't do well. So we give them lots of practice in real situations, right? And then once you've had that bit of practice and you start to see what's working and what's not, we've also on the front end given people the theory, right? The what do you need to know as you're managing conflict? What's the difference between process-driven conflict and people-driven conflict? And how do you deal with passive-aggressive personality styles? And right, so we've given them the information on the front end. Then you give some real practice. And then you also, part of the process is giving people those self-reflective tools, because you need to be able to assess, okay, I managed this one in the workplace. What did I do right? What did I do? What could I have done better? And how can I enhance on that? And then you get to come back and you can try the scenarios again and see how it works. So I think it's giving people the chance to apply it in a fictional setting. So you get to just mess around and see your skills in practice. And then once you're applying it in the real world, the self-reflective skills and the theoretical knowledge to be able to, assess. Did I do it well? Did I not do it well? What could I do better?
I think this, again, it kind of goes back to technology and what are we actually doing what advances are we seeing that can really change the space. This is also, an interesting conversation, particularly for the trades and I'd say like more male-dominated industries where there's just a lot of guys in there, and having those conflicts, a lot of the time, the conflict resolution skills, not always so great. So have you seen, I guess, working in those industries yourself where that's kind of made a real difference to really open it up, especially where maybe the guys weren't kind of, comfortable, or maybe they were button heads in a way. Yeah. And that had to have made a big change, I'd imagine.
Yeah. And from that, we have more of a, where we're working with supervisors and coming into a culture that was a little bit toxic and starting to just change the conversations. And really when you change the leadership perspectives and empower the leadership a little bit more and start to bring them into a shift of attitude, right? The workers aren't always just trying to get away with whatever they're trying to get away with. They're trying to do the best job that they can. And when you treat them that way, that's truly what starts to happen, right? When you shift the leadership perspective, that's when you start to shift the culture. And we have seen that in some of the organizations we've gone into, and it's really gratifying. It's nice to see it go from fairly toxic in terms of what's being said and happening to that shift to being more positive focused and working more on building trust rather than, being so negative in the way that you're interacting. Yeah.
And it's got to make a huge impact. And no one likes to go to a workplace where they don't feel like they can raise concerns, or they don't feel like they're able to really speak openly and freely and manage those conflicts when they do come up. So I think for anyone, listening that finds themselves in that kind of space, hopefully they feel like they can, start to kind of implement some tools here and there to really make that difference. Susan, I want to thank you again for taking the time. I think it is a very important message to share, and I'm sure a lot of the audience will get quite a bit out of it here.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Mark. It's so great to have this space to be able to share this kind of information. And I've watched several of the podcasts, so I think it's an excellent tool for so many people to be able to get this kind of information.